What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 4 of the 2023 Halloween special. If you haven't yet watched the previous 3 episodes, I've linked them right up above. Go and check them out. I've had a ton of fun talking about horror films. And tonight we are talking about the classic slasher, John Carpenter's one and only Halloween. I have a confession. The first time that I actually sat down and watched this movie all the way through was about 15 minutes ago. Now don't get me wrong, it's not like it was anything new that I was experiencing. I mean, obviously I've known about this movie ever since I got into film, ever since I really started learning anything about movies at all. Like, it is a classic film, everybody knows Halloween, everybody's seen Halloween, everybody knows how it plays out, including me. I never just, what I'm saying is I never like seen the whole movie in one uninterrupted sitting. I've seen like big bits and pieces of it on TV. I remember I watched the first half of the movie on TV one time, and I didn't get back to watching the second half of the movie until like a month or two later because I just had so much going on. But technically speaking, I had seen this movie before tonight. But tonight was the first time that I sat down and watched the movie from beginning to end uninterrupted without any pausing or breaks or anything. And I'm finally talking about it on the channel. This is one of those movies you think I would have covered way back in the early days on my channel when I was trying to knock out all the classics right out the gate. But either way, I'm talking about it now, and what better time to do it? We're in October, it's Halloween time, this is the Halloween special, so let's talk about this film. This film was directed by the one and only John Carpenter, and it stars Donald Pleasence and Jamie Lee Curtis, and it was released in 1975. This film tells the story of Michael Myers, a man who, when he was a child, murdered his own sister and was held in a mental maximum security facility ever since. Then, on the night of October 30th, 1978, Michael Myers escapes and heads to Haddonfield, Illinois, where on a fateful Halloween night, he goes on a killing spree. This movie has one of the eeriest opening scenes of all time. The decision to put us right in the POV of the killer, but not really letting us know we're in the POV of the killer until we actually see him grab the knife and go upstairs and kill his sister, was so smart, because this movie starts off and this entire opening scene is one long one take, which I adore. And it starts off, and at first it just looks like, you know, a typical opening shot. You know, it's a wide establishing shot of a house. It starts panning towards it, panning around the corner. You see two characters inside. You're like, okay, this is kind of a very well shot, like, opening shot. This is really cool. Then you start to hear breathing. You start to pick up on the movements of the camera and how it's looking around, and you start to realize, oh, this is somebody's POV, and they're stalking these people, and you instantly know that the person's perspective that you are viewing this scene from is not somebody that we should trust. It's one of the best opening scenes of all time, just in film, period, not even just in the horror genre. And of course, I gotta talk about the music. This movie has an iconic soundtrack, also composed by Carpenter, which is even more impressive considering that, I don't know what situation he's in now, but back then, he wasn't really a musician. This was such a low-budget, independent film, and they really didn't have much to work with. That Carpenter just started playing some notes on the piano, came up with something he liked, and threw it together, and it made it into the film. And all the better for it, because this is genuinely one of the best and most iconic horror villain themes of all time. This movie also has masterful lighting. The way nighttime is lit in this movie is so well done. It is so eerie, and it really hits home the atmosphere that this movie builds so well. It just really builds that tension, because in some of the more suspenseful scenes of the movie, there are dark corners and doorways everywhere, and you're just sitting there thinking, he could be standing right there and I wouldn't even know, because it is just so dark in that corner or in that room. And you think he could be anywhere, and that's what's so terrifying about it. Something I genuinely love about this first film that was sort of done away with in some of the later Halloween films was the mythical buildup of Michael Myers as a character. There is so much ambiguity surrounding him as a person. You know that he killed his sister when he was a kid, and that's about it. Like, you know he killed his sister. He was admitted into a mental institution for like 15 years. You know he's a psycho. But like, the way that Loomis, portrayed brilliantly by Donald Pleasence, builds up the tension around this character in the opening minutes of this film is so creepy. He doesn't refer to Michael Myers as him. He refers to him as it, or the evil, as he says. And even in the final credits of the film, this was not a horror villain that was iconically recognized as Michael Myers. He was simply credited as the Shape. The aura and just the overall unsettling tone and ambiguity that they built around Michael Myers as a character was just perfectly done. This movie also has excellent sound design throughout the entire thing, but I really took note of it in these opening few minutes when Loomis is with that nurse driving to this hospital that Michael Myers has been being kept at, and it's just a massive downpour and there's terrifying cracks of thunder throughout the conversation. It really helps suck you into the world visually, audibly, and just it really helps build that atmosphere, which again is something that this movie excels at. Every single aspect of this movie on a technical level does such a good job at just building this eerie-ass atmosphere that so many horror movies fail to capture, and this movie did it incredibly well, especially for the budget and the resources that they had. It's genuinely unprecedented that it turned out as effective as it did. And adding on to impressive things about this movie, in spite of its low budget and limited resources, is the way it is shot. This is a very well-directed movie with tons of very well-composed shots, including tracking shots, POV shots, one takes, and just the overall composition and framing of so many moments in this film are just so well done. You can really tell that Carpenter was trying to make as good of a movie as he could with what he had, which is so inspiring to filmmakers everywhere that he had almost nothing to work with this movie, but he put his heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears, and just cold, hard passion into it, and look what we got. An enduring classic that had no right to be one. Now, this movie isn't really known for really good characterization or writing. In fact, it's kind of known for the fact that it's so good in spite of some pretty poor characterization and poor writing. But I actually do feel that Laurie, our protagonist, and obviously the protagonist of most of the Halloween films, is actually a very likable character and established as such within the first act of this movie. The way she's talking to this kid that she babysits early on in the film, it just really endears you to her character. She's really nice. You see her in school. She answers some questions in class and she's very smart, very attentive. She's just a very mature person and you just get that vibe from her right off the bat, which makes her a very easy character to root for and a very likable one. Now, I made a quick comment earlier about how good Donald Pleasence is as Loomis in this film, but this man deserves his own segment of this video, so let me talk about it for a minute. Donald Pleasence, rest in peace, man. You were such a treasure, you were such a talented actor, and your portrayal of Loomis in this film is absolutely astonishing. It's iconic. Pleasence's performance in this movie truly is masterful. He has so many great lines, great dialogue, obviously the very famous Devil's Eyes monologue, and I could see what was hiding behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. It gives me chills. It gave me like the biggest rush of goosebumps tonight when I watched it. That being said, if we're going to acknowledge the great performances in this film from Nick Castle, Donald Pleasence, Jamie Lee Curtis, we do have to acknowledge some of the not so great acting and writing in this film. Laurie Strode's friends in this film are atrocious. The performances are bad, the dialogue for them is bad, and honestly, maybe the performances make it bad. Maybe if they had some better, more seasoned actors to be delivering the dialogue, it would have felt a little more natural, but there are some truly terrible line readings and some scenes that are kind of hard to take seriously just because of the fact that they're in it. But in a way that kind of also works in the film's favor because you get really annoyed with some of these characters that when Michael is around you sort of get into it because you kind of want him to, you know, I mean, I don't want to sound like a dick or anything, but like, I mean, come on. That's why so many people watch horror movies. It is, we have to admit it. It is fun to watch a crazy murderer kill characters that we don't like. But yeah, there just is some really terrible acting from some of the supporting characters in this movie. And my only other real issue with this movie is that while the score is incredible, and it's amazing that John Carpenter threw it together himself, not really knowing much about music, I do think that certain tracks within it are overused. Like, just within the first 30 minutes of this film, the same track is cued like 5 different times. It's a bit much. Once again, great music, but when you start to spam it throughout the entire film, it does get a little like, okay, I mean, do you got anything else? Like, it's a great track, but, you know, you got a little bit of variety somewhere? Now, a lot of people who aren't as familiar with classics like this, particularly people from my generation, may look back on this movie and label it as bad and see it as bad because they think it's cliche or predictable or just too simple, or it's just like we've seen this a million times. But you gotta understand that when this movie came out, that was not the case. This movie is sort of responsible for solidifying the tropes that we see in pretty much every slasher film since its release. Some people may find that to be an issue because you might want to blame this movie for all the bad slasher movies that we got after it that all felt the same because of those tropes and cliches. But when this movie came out, when it was made, those weren't standardized tropes and cliches. So for this movie, it was still original and didn't feel derivative. So it's not something that I personally hold against the movie at all. In fact, I think in this film, those tropes are actually handled pretty well for the most part. There's a lot of horror movies with great finales. I just talked about Jaws last episode and how the final 20-30 minutes of that movie are just perfect. And I did mention the finale of Halloween in my Nosferatu video. Now that I'm talking about Halloween, let me say that the final 20 minutes of this movie are filmmaking and horror perfection. The final 20 minutes of this movie are truly cinematic mastery. Everything about it, the pacing, the score, the visuals, and the performances all come together to make one of the best horror third acts of all time. And while Jamie Lee Curtis was horrified by her performance in the final 20 minutes of this movie, John Carpenter did make sure to reassure her, "You did a really good job." Because doing sequences like this can feel weird as an actor because you're sitting there and you're screaming, crying, you don't have the visual in your head, you don't know in your head what it's going to look like on screen, you don't have a score playing to emphasize the tone, so you're just there just bawling your eyes out, just like, oh my god, like acting so scared you feel ridiculous, you feel like an idiot. But then you actually watch Jamie Lee Curtis's performance in these final 20 minutes and it just feels so authentic. Like, yeah, if you came across a house and you found all these dead bodies and you have had it confirmed that this boogeyman that the kids you've been babysitting have been rumoring throughout the whole night, and you've just been telling them that it's not real, that it is real, and you find out that it is, like you finally get it confirmed that it is, and you see all these dead bodies, and that's a lot. That would be a lot to handle, and I think Jamie Lee really sold the horror of that situation in these scenes. It's extremely convincing as a performance. Like, yeah, if I was in a situation like this and all of that was hitting me like a truck within one single moment all at once, absolutely I would start crying. Now, there was something in this finale that I picked up on that I never really picked up on before, and I haven't really seen anybody talk about it online at all. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining came out in 1980. This film came out in 1978, just 2 years earlier. And I couldn't help but think, as I was watching this movie with the brilliantly terrifying closet scene where Laurie Strode is hiding in the closet and Michael Myers is breaking through it, and you see Laurie, like, they're like freaking out, screaming and crying and everything, I couldn't help but be reminded of probably the most iconic scene from The Shining, with Jack Nicholson hacking down that door and Shelley Duvall's horrified face just sitting there helpless and screaming. I couldn't help but be reminded of that and thinking, was he paying homage to Halloween? Because they're also very similarly shot, because they are framed extremely similarly, and like the breaking wood falling in front of the horrified face of our heroine. I don't know, it just struck me as very similar to that scene, and I'm just wondering, like, maybe Kubrick was inspired by this low-budget indie movie at the time. And since these final 20 minutes are as masterful as they are, of course, this movie has one of the best endings in horror history. It is so eerie and just so unsettling and disturbing. Just the idea of this looming darkness, and the idea that Michael Myers could be standing anywhere. He could be anywhere. Where did he go? Who knows? Is he dead? Is he alive? What is happening? Is he even human? But this movie does not over-explain anything. In fact, it doesn't really explain much of Michael's condition at all, which is why it works so well. This is a perfect example of when less is more in horror films. Back in the 60s and 70s, horror movies really valued that filmmaking technique of less and more, and it benefited the tension in so many of these films so much. You got Psycho, for example, you got Jaws, and you have this film, and honestly, even the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which a lot of people would think is very violent if they haven't seen it, and it's sort of known for being very violent, but the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like basically bloodless for the majority of the movie. So yeah, the original Halloween is a classic, not just in the horror genre, but in the film industry as a whole. It is insanely well made for the resources and the budget that they had, and it put John Carpenter on the map as a master of suspense. It's a staple of the Halloween holiday. It's on pretty much any list for yearly Halloween movie watching. I love it. I'm going to give John Carpenter's Halloween an 8 out of 10. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching, and thank you for tuning back into the 2023 Halloween special. Look forward to episode 5 of this special, in which I'm going to be talking about something that a lot of you probably aren't expecting me to talk about given the movies I've talked about thus far, but definitely look forward to it. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep writing, keep shooting, and keep